They told us the pool was for everyone. But then they banned music, food, even laughter. One woman, the HOA's self-appointed queen, ruled with rules instead of reason. Until the day we said enough. This isn't just a story about pool noodles. It's about power, rebellion, and the summer we took everything back. Hi there, and thanks for being here. I post meaningful and relatable life stories every single day. So if you enjoy them, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Today's story is another heartfelt one. Sit back and enjoy the journey. You ever get that feeling like something's watching you? Not a person, a presence. A force. Cold, clinical, like an invisible clipboard silently judging your existence. That's how I always felt walking past the neighborhood pool. Not a splash, not a ripple. Just sunlight bouncing off a surface, so still it looked like it belonged in a museum exhibit titled, Fun. Forbidden here. The sign read, Pool rules. No food. No music. No fun. Yes, no fun was an actual rule. And no, it wasn't a joke. I wish I could say I was surprised. But after living under the iron grip of our HOA for 5 years, I knew better. The pool wasn't just a pool. It was a monument to one woman's quiet tyranny. Judith Whitmore, pool committee chair since 1993. Same blue eyes, same stiff bun, same white sandals that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. She hadn't gotten in the water once. Not once. But she wrote the rules like Moses on the mountaintop. She banned pool noodles. Pool noodles. You think I'm exaggerating? I wish. A notice went up in the community newsletter. New safety concerns have arisen. Effective immediately, flotation toys, particularly pool noodles, are no longer permitted. Thank you for prioritizing safety and decorum. That was the moment something in me snapped. It wasn't the first time the HOA had overreached. I'd stayed quiet when they fined me for having non-regulation mailbox color. I paid the fee when they cited my lawn for seasonal unevenness. But this was personal. This was my kids' summer, my Saturdays, my sanity. I was done watching my daughter sit by the edge of a silent pool, swinging her feet in chlorinated melancholy because some bitter woman mistook control for community. So I decided to fight back. Not with petitions. Not with polite emails that ended up ignored in some HOA inbox hell. No, this was war. Chlorinated rebellion. And I had a plan. It started like all good revolutions do, with a whisper. A few parents at the park, heads leaning in close over coffee cups. Someone I trusted, David from Elm Street, had already had 3 citations this year, one for excessive cannonball noise. He was in. Julia, whose kid had been scolded for running joyfully, also in. Even old Mr. Fletcher with his oxygen tank said if he had to spend one more summer in the HOA's sunless dystopia, he'd throw his walker in the pool just to make a splash. We called it Splashback. A rogue pool party. Grills. Floaties. Live music. It would be beautiful chaos. One glorious cannonball into the porcelain face of HOA authority. But first, logistics. We had to get in. The HOA kept the pool locked like Fort Knox. Entry by keycard only. But remember, I wasn't just angry. I was prepared. I had saved everything. Emails, rule updates, HOA newsletters, even a recorded board meeting on Zoom where Judith dozed off during a discussion about pool signage fonts. I had leverage. More importantly, I had Dan. Dan was the neighborhood handyman. He once fixed Judith's sprinkler system and saw things no man should have to see. After that, he was no fan of hers. I invited him for a beer, told him the plan. He leaned back in the lawn chair, sipped, and said only one thing. You'll need the master key. I know where she keeps it. The man was a patriot. The night before the party, I stood on my back porch, staring at the stars. The air was thick with humidity and tension. I thought of my daughter, her pink floatie shaped like a flamingo, lying deflated in the garage since last summer. I thought of every person in the neighborhood who was just trying to enjoy their own damn backyard without being threatened with fines for wind chimes or improperly stored recycling bins. And I thought about Judith. The pool was her last kingdom. The final patch of turf she ruled without challenge. She'd sacrificed joy for control, traded laughter for laminated notices. She had no idea the rebellion was already in motion. Saturday. The day of splashback. We met just after dawn. 5 of us at first, then 10. Parents, teens, even a few retirees with mischievous grins that reminded me what it was like to be young and free. We worked fast. Music system, check. Portable grill, check. Water slide rented from a guy named Rico who swore, "It's only slightly illegal." Check. And then, just before noon, I used the master key. The gate clicked open. The pool glistened in the sun like it was waiting for us. We didn't tiptoe. We marched. A boombox blasted Party in the USA. 2 kids sprinted in with cannonballs that sent geysers sky high. Someone tossed me a beer. I caught it, cracked it open, and took the first victorious sip as the neighborhood transformed. The dry rain was over. And that, dear listener, was when Judith arrived. White visor, clipboard, fury in human form. She stood at the gate, trembling with outrage, like a porcelain teapot left on a roaring stove. I could see the exact moment she spotted the grill, the floaties, the music speakers humming with rebellion. She didn't say a word. She just pulled out her phone. You guessed it. She called the cops. But Judith made one fatal mistake. She thought the cops were on her side. Judith stood like a wax statue at the gates of our uprising. White visor, linen slacks, clipboard gripped so tight her knuckles had gone bone white. Behind her, a growing swarm of concerned citizens clustered, armed with sun hats and judgment. I watched them through the grill smoke, the self-appointed defenders of suburban order, staring as if we'd smeared graffiti on the Mona Lisa. The speakers thumped louder. Kids cannonballed. Hot dogs sizzled. Someone had set up a lemonade stand next to a cooler marked adult lemonade. A man I didn't recognize was flipping burgers in a Hawaiian shirt like he was born to do it. For once, the pool had life. Messy, noisy, unregulated life. Judith raised her phone slowly. The sun glinted off her wedding ring. 3 diamonds. 1 for each decade she'd ruled this neighborhood with laminated tyranny. She pressed a single button, held the phone to her ear, and said the words we were all expecting. "Yes, officer. I'd like to report a disturbance." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I smiled. Because what Judith didn't know, what she could never understand, was that I had already thought 3 moves ahead. Let me rewind 72 hours. After Dan handed me the master key and muttered something about Judith's demon dog, I knew it was just a matter of time before she caught wind of our plans. I needed insurance, not legal, not violent, just truth. So I made a call.
Detective Marcus Graves.
Retired. Technically. Still worked odd jobs for the city, mostly paperwork and cold case audits. More importantly, my cousin. Marcus owed me from a bachelor party incident we don't talk about. I asked him, casually, how one might host a completely compliant gathering at a community pool, assuming certain officials might object. He laughed. Then he got serious. You want to throw a rogue party, fine. But do it smart. Permits. Paperwork. Backup. So I did. I filed a form with the county for a pop-up community event. Described it as a neighborhood morale-building initiative. I registered it under a non-profit LLC, the Wet Rebellion Foundation. Thank you very much. I even looped in a local food vendor who agreed to cater in exchange for photos for his website. Everything above board. And I made sure someone from the city clerk's office would be nearby, coincidentally checking on summer events. Her name was Donna, and she hated HOAs with a passion usually reserved for tax season and potholes. I wasn't just throwing a party. I was laying a trap. Back to the pool. The cops arrived 15 minutes later. 2 squad cars. Lights flashing but no sirens. Judith waved them down like she was flagging an aircraft. I watched from my lounge chair as she leaned in close, whispering fast and furious, pointing toward the pool like we'd broken into Fort Knox and were bathing in state secrets. The officers nodded politely. Then they walked toward me. The crowd hushed. The music dropped to background noise. One of the cops, Officer Jimenez, adjusted his belt, looked me in the eye and said, "So, whose party is this?" I stood, wiped my hands on a towel, and handed him a clipboard of my own. That would be me. Here's the permit. Health code compliant, temporary use authorization from the county. vendor licenses inside the folder, and a signed waiver from every parent present. He blinked, looked at the paperwork. His partner whistled low under his breath. That's thorough. I smiled. We like to do things by the book. From the gate, Judith was watching, horror dawning across her face like the sunrise over a funeral. She took a step forward. They're trespassing. This is HOA property. Officer Jimenez turned to her. Actually, ma'am, this pool is owned by the community and maintained through collective dues. The bylaws indicate shared access, and as long as there's no damage or health violation, this looks good to us. Judith sputtered. But the rules, they brought music. Music. The other officer chuckled. Yeah, and pretty decent speakers too. Is that earth, wind, and fire? Someone in the pool yelled, September, and half the crowd sang the next line in perfect unison. I watched Judith's face go from pale to blotchy red in 2.3 seconds. Then came the final twist. Officer Jimenez waved toward the grill. You mind if we stick around for a bit? Smells better than whatever's waiting back at the station. Someone handed them each a hot dog. Another offered souvenir towels I'd had made, bright blue, embroidered with the phrase, Down with dry tyranny. I swear, one of them laughed so hard he had to sit down. Judith turned on her heel and stormed out, trailed by her dwindling army of clipboard loyalists. One of them, Mr. Tompkins, who always looked like he hated being there, paused near the gate, looked at the pool, at the kids, at the music, then quietly took off his HOA-issued name tag and dropped it in the trash. That night someone, not me, made a TikTok of the whole thing. Slow-motion footage of the cops biting into hot dogs, overlaid with the song Eye of the Tiger, zooming in on the towel logo. It hit 600,000 views before midnight. The next morning, an email went out to the entire neighborhood. Subject: Pool Committee Resignation. For paragraphs of bureaucratic sorrow, citing community response, lack of support, and recent developments. Judith's name wasn't on it. She was gone.
No announcement. No apology.
Just silence. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet, because Judith wasn't the kind to disappear. And I had a feeling this coup was only the beginning. There's a silence that comes after a win. Not peace. Not joy. Suspicion. That's what settled over the neighborhood after Splashback. We laughed, sure. We high-fived. We watched the views climb online and clinked glasses over burgers grilled in defiance. But underneath the celebration, I could feel it, the shift, like a storm holding its breath just over the horizon. Judith was gone, but she wasn't done. 3 days later, the first email came. From a new address, compliance@uppergrove-hoa.net. A notice of safety review. Boilerplate stuff, formal wording, veiled threats. It cited noise complaints, chemical storage discrepancies, unauthorized structural usage. It referenced the pool but not the party. Not directly. Then came the visits. Not from police. From inspectors. Code enforcement. Sanitation. Even someone claiming to be with Parks and Rec, which made no sense since the pool wasn't a park. They came with clipboards and frowns, measuring tape and polite condescension. Each one left without finding anything. But each time they took notes. My notes started stacking up too. I'd see unfamiliar cars parked too long at corners. Drones hovering just high enough to pretend they weren't snooping. One evening, my daughter found a flyer in the mailbox. A flyer that wasn't mailed. It read, Water Wasters. Splashback event used an estimated 2,300 gallons of community water. Paid for by your dues. The logo at the bottom said, Citizens for a Dry Grove. We hadn't seen that name before, but the font, the color scheme, identical to Judith's HOA stationery. I tried to track the source. The domain on the email was recently registered, masked by a privacy service. But the website, someone had launched a whole site, crude, clearly rushed but functional. It listed violators. Me, David from Elm Street, Julia, Mr. Fletcher, yes, even the retired vet who'd done nothing but donate folding chairs. They labeled us rebels. They posted pictures of us at the party, faces included. Under each one, a line, Still think they care about community values? That's when I realized this wasn't just retaliation. It was counterinsurgency. The final nail came from inside the fence.
Rosa.
She'd always been quiet. Mid-30s, glasses, tidy garden, HOA treasurer. During splashback, she'd even brought brownies. We thought she was on our side. Until she wasn't. I got the email by accident. Or maybe fate. Her name autofilled when I forwarded photos from the party to our group. Instead of sending them just to the inner circle, I hit reply all. Included Rosa. Her response didn't come to me. It went to the new HOA address. He's collecting documentation. Thought you should know. For sentences.
No επάλεγει. No χεσετάσχεν.
I stared at the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I reread her message until the words lost meaning. That night, I deleted her from the group thread. We didn't talk about it. But we all knew. Judith was back. Not in person, not yet. But in spirit. In motion. Her new organization, Citizens for a Dry Grove, wasn't officially part of the HOA, which meant they could skirt certain rules. They weren't bound by transparency requirements. They didn't have to hold elections. They didn't need bylaws filed with the county. They were a shadow committee, a ghost council, and they were building a case. On a Tuesday morning, I got a knock on the door. Courier. Not mail, not delivery, a human with a folder and a clipboard. The envelope was thick. Inside, a cease and desist from Citizens for a Dry Grove. A complaint filed with the city for unauthorized event hosting. A summons for a community arbitration hearing. And, most interesting of all, a petition signed by 41 residents requesting the formation of a new pool oversight subcommittee, chaired by Judith Whitmore. Her name was back. In ink. Right there on the letterhead. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was reclaiming her throne. I called Marcus, cousin, former detective, the one who helped with Splashback's paperwork. I showed him the documents, laid them out like a crime scene on my kitchen table. He leaned over them, silent, reading slowly. They're building a civil case, he said. They're going to argue negligence, safety liability, probably try to pin it on you personally. But it was all legal, I said. He nodded. Sure, but this isn't about law. It's about optics, pressure, fear. He flipped to the last page, the petition. Then he froze. You know this name? He asked. I looked. Third one down. Tyler Harmon. I blinked. Yeah, that's my neighbor. He helped me set up the speakers. Marcus gave me a long look. Not anymore. Kept going. Someone vandalized the pool chairs. Red paint in slashes across the backs. A window was cracked at the clubhouse. The community bulletin board was stripped bare, except for one flyer left behind.
Wetchaos is gelijk aan draaisouwende sequences.
The rebellion had sparked something wild. But Judith? Judith was turning it into war. I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound outside was a threat. Every email a trap. My kids started asking why people weren't saying hi at the park anymore. Why the nice lady with the pink visor wasn't waving back. I told her it was complicated. That grown-ups sometimes forget how to share. I didn't tell her the truth, that a woman with too much time and too much power was trying to erase us, one paper at a time. But I was done waiting. She thought her web of rules would hold. She forgot that some of us know how to cut clean through silk. You don't sleep the same once a war starts in your own cul-de-sac. The walls feel thinner. The sounds outside become suspicious. Sprinklers too late at night, wind chimes that suddenly stop mid-swing. Every conversation with a neighbor becomes a chess match of tone and facial micro-expressions. After the petition landed, after Rose's betrayal, after Tyler's signature showed up on the new committee list, I stopped trusting anyone who hadn't cannonballed into the pool that day. But I wasn't about to roll over and drown in paperwork. If Judith was building a case behind the curtain, I needed to cut the strings before she finished tying the noose. So I followed the paper trail, and I found the chlorine files. It started with a visit to City Hall. Most people forget this, but HOAs are supposed to register changes, committee reconfigurations, property usage modifications, structural amendments with the local zoning commission. It's not criminal law. It's land use, but it leaves breadcrumbs. I spent a full morning under dim fluorescence with a bored clerk named Vicky, who agreed to help once I said the magic words. You ever deal with Judith Whitmore? She froze, then nodded. God help you. She printed out a stack of filings so thick it needed a rubber band. Everything the HOA had submitted over the past 10 years. And in between all the fine print and laminated nonsense, I started seeing patterns. Judith had been manipulating the HOA from the inside out for years. She'd rewritten subcommittee roles, reassigned votes by proxy, created subrules nested inside outdated appendices. And here was the kicker. She had submitted a maintenance expenditure approval for pool chemical budgets every single quarter for the past 5 years. Except, the pool had barely been used. Why were we paying $9,000 annually for chlorine no one was swimming in? I took the files to Marcus. He brought a bottle of whiskey and a cop's old instinct for patterns. We combed through the numbers together, line by line, cross-referenced the vendor names, dates, signatures. Here, he said, tapping one invoice. This pool maintenance company? I've seen that name before, but not as a contractor. He pulled up the local business registry on his phone. The company, Clearwave Chemical Solutions, was registered under a parent LLC. Guess who the managing partner was? Stephen Whitmore, Judith's nephew. Of course it was. So now we had motive. We had money. We had a woman using pool rules not just as a power play, but as a profit stream. Every quarter, she padded the budget, inflated usage reports, and funneled HOA dues into a family-owned business. Which meant every time someone got fined for bringing chips or playing music, they weren't just suffering under dry tyranny, they were paying for it. It was corruption.
Petit, spritchicaped corruption.
But corruption nonetheless. And it didn't stop there. Buried in the old bylaws, the ones Judith kept citing like scripture, was a clause for committee removal. Not new bylaws. The original document from the HOA's formation in 1995. The clause was simple. Any standing committee may be dissolved by majority resident vote, given at least 48 hours notice and with documentation of financial mismanagement. It had never been used, but it was still legally binding. And now, I had both of those requirements. We printed everything. Invoices, vendor records, bylaws, copies of public records showing Judith had overridden quorum procedures to approve her own subcommittee appointments. I even found a scanned email from a former HOA treasurer who'd quietly resigned, citing pressure to fudge numbers. We didn't have to guess anymore. We had evidence. All that was left was to use it. 2 days later, I called a community meeting.
No tricks. No fireworks.
Just folding chairs, pitchers of lemonade, and a sign-in sheet. I made sure we had a neutral space, the library meeting room downtown. Not the clubhouse. That was her ground. We weren't giving her home court advantage. I invited everyone, even the ones who'd turned. Even Rosa. Especially Rosa. And when I stood up in front of those 60 people, I didn't start with accusations. I started with numbers. Did you know? I said, holding up the invoice. We've paid more for chlorine in the past 2 years than for the pool's entire structural repair history. A murmur. I continued. That the company receiving those checks is registered to Judith Whitmore's nephew? Gasps. Did you know the bylaws she uses to scare you haven't been updated with the county in 8 years? That she forged a vote to reappoint herself as chair after the last committee resigned. Now there was silence. Uncomfortable, shattering silence. And then I held up the old rules, the ones she never wanted us to see. Section 12C. Residents can call for a committee vote with proper documentation. I looked around the room, at the people who had been scolded, fined, threatened with letters for hanging towels on the wrong side of the railing. Consider this your notice. I've got the documents. We've got the signatures. And we're taking our pool back. Rosa was the first to stand. She looked pale, ashamed, but she walked to the table and added her name to the list. Then Tyler. Then Julia. Even Mr. Tompkins, the old-school rule follower who once wrote me up for leaving trash bins out an hour late, stood, stepped forward, and signed. One by one they came. Even the quiet ones. Even the scared ones. Because Judith had ruled through silence. And we were done being silent. By sunset, the petition had 49 signatures. More than enough. The vote would happen. And Judith? She didn't even know it yet. The vote was set for Saturday. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same day Splashback had made its glorious Cannonball debut, now stood as the date the community would decide if it was finally ready to wash Judith's fingerprints off our lives. We held the meeting at the pool. Not the library. Not the clubhouse. The pool. Our pool. It was a bold move, yes, but I didn't want this vote buried in a back room. I wanted the echo of every I to bounce off chlorinated tile and old bricks. I wanted the ghosts of cannonballs and children's laughter to stand witness when it was all laid bare. I arrived early. The gate was already unlocked. That should have been my first warning. I stepped inside and stopped cold. She was there, sitting on the lifeguard chair like it was a throne. White suit, white visor, a scarf the exact shade of HOA beige. Legs crossed at the ankle, clipboard resting in her lap like a gavel. Judith Whitmore, unbothered, untouched. She didn't even flinch when I walked in, just tilted her head, like a hawk sizing up a rodent who didn't know it was already caught. "Didn't think you'd show early," she said without looking up. "I like to set up before a public execution." She smiled at that. Cold. Empty. "You really think this vote means anything?" I didn't answer. She did. "You can get them to sign whatever you want. Paper doesn't matter. People are weak. They like order, rules. They want to believe in structure." She gestured lazily to the laminated pool rules still bolted to the chain-link fence. "They don't want freedom. They want protection from it." I stepped closer, letting her finish whatever villain monologue she had prepared. She was trying to rattle me, but all I could feel was exhaustion. Years of small injustices, silent frustrations, whispered threats. They all sat heavy on my shoulders. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for closure. "Judith," I said, "you've turned this neighborhood into a prison." She turned to me finally. For the first time, I saw her blink. Just once. A twitch of humanity slipping through. Then, footsteps. Voices. People arriving. It was time. We didn't waste it. Julia passed out the ballots. Marcus stood at the edge with the folder, the chlorine files. He wouldn't speak unless challenged, but his presence alone was a pressure cooker. The room was calm, respectful. Even those still loyal to Judith knew this wasn't another coffee klatch. This was a reckoning. I kept it short. I laid out the financial mismanagement, the fraudulent vendor contracts, the procedural violations, all of them backed by official documentation. The bylaws, the clause, the right to remove any committee by majority vote. I finished with one line. Judith never protected this pool. She suffocated it. And the only thing she's built here is fear. Silence. Then we voted. One by one, hands raised. The tallies came in quietly. I didn't watch the count. I watched the people. Some faces were tired. Some were scared. But most were just relieved, like they were finally allowed to exhale after holding their breath for a decade. Final count. 42-6. Judith's reign was over. She didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't even stand. She looked down at her clipboard, pressed a button on her phone, and muttered something like, "It was never about the pool." Then she stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked past me without a word. She didn't take the clipboard. She left it behind. A week later, the HOA board released a public statement. The pool committee has been formally dissolved. A new board will be elected under community review and proper oversight. The pool will reopen this summer under new guidelines. No mention of Judith.
No ceremony.
Just an asterisk in the minutes of suburban history. But something had changed. Kids came back. Music came back. A few people even brought pool noodles, timid at first like smuggling contraband. But no one said a word. And that silence? It was no longer fear. It was freedom. A few nights after the vote, I got a letter.
No envelope.
Just folded paper, tucked in my mailbox. Handwritten. "You were right. I forgot what joy sounded like. Thank you for reminding us. I'm sorry I didn't stand sooner. Rosa." And so the chlorine kingdom fell. Not with pitchforks. Not with lawsuits. but with one smart rebellion, a pile of evidence, and a community brave enough to finally say, no, no to silence, no to rules written in fear, no to dry tyranny, and yes, finally, to fun. Long live the wet rebellion. And that brings our story to a close. If you've watched all the way through, thank you. Your support means the world, so feel free to hit that subscribe button. I've also selected 2 more videos I think you'll really enjoy. Give them a watch. I'll be back soon with another story to share. Until then, take care.